The Last Guardian runs at 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5, making it the ultimate way to play the game. That's the headline, and the footage really speaks for itself. We've never seen director Fumito Ueda's creation run so smoothly on any platform, and certainly not on its original PS4 or PS4 Pro release back in 2016. But of course, there is a catch to this. To cut to the chase, to get a full unlocked 60 FPS on PS5, you need to own the disc version, and not run from the digital release. Insert your disc, avoid installing any updates, notably the latest 1.03 patch, and there you go. A full 60 is now in effect. So how's this happened? Does PS5 truly run the game perfectly at long last? And are there any downsides to playing this way? I've revisited one of my favourite games of the last generation to see the score, and the results are surprising. PS5 at last realises the potential of a game which, through the years, has buckled under the weight of its own ambition. It famously took 9 years to arrive since its first reveal in 2007, with a PS3 version canned in favour of PS4 and PS4 Pro. On release, I described it back then as like opening a time capsule from 2007. Partly, there was a charm to that. It's a game which feels every bit a true successor to the Shadow of the Colossus. Beautiful art and puzzle-driven gameplay steal the show, but then it's fair to say its controls haven't aged so gracefully, especially the camera. Even on PS4 and PS4 Pro though, the game struggled to run well at a target 30 FPS. Drops into the 20s were frequent. The only real saving grace, it turned out, was PS4 Pro's option for playing at 1080p, forced through its system menus. This improved frame rates across the game by rendering at a native 1920 by 1080, and yet it still wasn't perfect. So then, now we have PS5, a full 2 generations on from the hardware it was first intended for, and my word, does it run beautifully. So let's track back a bit. When you boot the disc version, you'll be prompted to download patch 1.03. This adds several things over the native disc code, and most of them are beneficial. Here it is running on PS5. Firstly, there's the 30 FPS cap, as you can see, forcing it to never go above that number. Elsewhere, we have tweaks to the controls. The camera dead zone on the right stick was excessive at launch, which made it harder to turn your viewpoint, and patch 1.03 addresses it. Not to mention other various bugs in the base code. And finally, later patches also added high dynamic range support to the game. It's perhaps the biggest downside of the three here. Hdr looks beautiful in The Last Guardian. So to summarise, the 30 FPS cap, improved camera controls, bug fixes, and HDR are lost by avoiding this latest patch. That's the sacrifice you make by reverting to the disc code, the 1.00 version. The trade-off will come down to your preference, but on PS5, it means you can access 60 FPS as the max rendering target. The good news though, PS4 Pro support was enabled on the base disc version. This means you at least get a native 1890p resolution on PS5 straight from the disc, when outputting at 4K. Great stuff. Right, let's show this in order. First, let's look at what we had on PS4 Pro, the former best running version of the game. At release, its 4.2 teraflop GPU gave me hope it would smash through a game originally meant for PS3 hardware, but in reality, The Last Guardian is a complex beast. The combination of physics on water, chains, even physics across Trico's feathers, all combine to create some hefty sub 30 FPS drops. And lots of them too. I've got the game running in a patch-free state here, pure disc code, which helps show the true range of Pro's performance below and above 30. Certainly there are long stretches where it rises over 30. In general though, taxing areas also run between 20 to 30 FPS and rarely under that once CPU tasks are involved. Now clearly, this isn't the most fluid way to play, but visually speaking, PS4 Pro at least shone with an 1890p render target. As an aside, the trick to simply hit a solid 30 FPS here is to boot the game with 1080p output selected from the system. This lowers the resolution to match the base PS4 version's native 1920 by 1080. And here it is, disc version 1.00 again, but running at a lower resolution, getting us much higher performance, now between 30 and 50 FPS. Easily is enough to avoid drops with a 30 FPS cap enabled, and till now, this has been the smoothest way to play on Pro. Also, it's worth noting this function works on PS5 too. Setting 1080p in the new console system menus triggers the same native 1080p mode. though as we'll see it's rarely, if ever, necessary to help its frame rate. In other words, you can just as well keep it at 4K. The PS5 version next then. Running from the disk code lets you complete the jump to 60 FPS no questions asked. The jump from the Pro's 4.2 teraflops to the 10.28 teraflops on PS5 is more than enough to achieve it. Every scene I've tested from the game's opening hours flies through. Even traditionally CPU intensive areas with lots of physics don't buckle it. Now, interestingly, it's understood that the disk version 1.00 does technically have a 30 FPS limit function call. Lance McDonald, creator of the Bloodborne 60 FPS patch, took a look at the code for us. You can see it in the Lua script here taken from the disk version of the game, but for whatever reason the function call is inactive, something that was of course patched in later versions of the game. In the disk code though, frame rate is definitely unlocked regardless. Add in the extra horsepower of PS5 and we can push much further, hitting the 60 FPS ceiling imposed by VSync. Let's see this from another angle. The 4K playback mode on PS4 Pro versus the same on PS5. No contest here obviously, but it's staggering to see the markup in performance between generations. It's practically a 2 times boost wherever it sticks to 30 FPS on Pro, and even the lurches into the 20s there barely register as a blip on PS5's pure 60 FPS reading. There really isn't much else to say on the right side of the screen besides to say it works. It really works. There is just one exception I've found as Trico battles 5 armoured sentries down this hallway, dropping PS5 into the 50s for a stretch. It's a rare exception next to the bulk of play, but shows it can happen. As an aside, even running this bit at 1080p on PS5 doesn't 100% lock it to 60, but since the rest of play runs at a fluid 60Hz like this, it's not a major issue. The game is very well optimised otherwise, even running as it is straight from the disk code. All of this cements the need for a true official PS5 patch to the game. The hardware is capable. The downside, of course, is the loss of several features added in patch 1.03, the control tweaks, the HDR. I'd rather have it all in one, but for my tastes, it's a sacrifice I'm happy to make to avoid going back to 30 FPS. Also, it must be said, as great as 60 is here, it's kind of a nuisance to dodge patch 1.03 to keep it active, by pausing or cancelling every time you boot the game. Sony insists on keeping each game up to date, and it'll tee up a new download every time you load it. Alternatively, you could just set the PS5 offline, that is an option. But then it's another hoop to jump through if you have other games to play online. This is so good, it'd be a shame to play it any other way though. Again, we need official support. PS5's back-compat has made all of this possible. Of course, there's much more of the game to play through, areas which absolutely hammered the PS4 Pro release. It's also not clear where the bottleneck truly is in the rare instances where PS5 drops. With native optimization for the hardware, an official PS5 update, rather than depending on the PS4 Pro compatibility layer, we could see these spots lock at 60. More visual features could be added, imagine a higher resolution mode, haptic controller support and more. But it's hard to be disappointed with what we've got here. Even the game's input latency, which is on the high side by default, is partially helped by running at 60 FPS rather than 30, which helps lower the response from input to screen. The Last Guardian at last finds the hardware it needed to realise its ambition. Years on from its announcement in 2007, and through a protracted difficult development, it's never looked or played better. For PS5 owners today, playing straight from the disc gives a genuinely great excuse to revisit the game too, but equally it poses a question about the digital future. Clearly there's still huge value to keeping a physical library of games like this. It gives us options, new ways to tap into a game where features are later blocked by the developer. We saw similar in Assassin's Creed Unity and also the likes of the God of War reboot, which I'll be looking into in due course. But for now, this is a real success story for PS5's push for 60 FPS gaming, even if it involves a workaround to get there. But that's all from me today. If you did find this video useful or insightful in any way, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get this video at high quality, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch with me or the team, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.